Chute Nations and the Duwamish peoples. I acknowledge the land on which I live, learn, and practice as Coast Salish land. I recognize this land acknowledgement to be only one small act in an ongoing process of understanding and opposing the systematic oppression and historic and contemporary erasure of indigeneity and Indigenous peoples. We are on stolen land. Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Yvette Moy, and I'm the University of Washington's Director of Public Lectures, and I'm so excited to welcome you here tonight. We will be meeting with our speaker, Provost of Muir College and Professor of Ethnic Studies, Dr. K. Wayne Yang. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to go through, and the first and most important one is we're having some technical difficulties with our ASL interpretation and our CART captioning in the room. So if you need it, you can stream it online on our YouTube channel until we can get it up and running. So we thank you in advance for your patience. Also, if you haven't done so already, please turn off or silence your cellular devices. We ask that you refrain from video or audio recording this evening's lecture. And this recording will be available following the lecture on the Office of Public Lectures YouTube channel, as I just mentioned earlier. We also ask that you please refrain from taking photographs while our lecturer is on the stage. It's very distracting. You will probably see our intern walking through and taking some photos, but she's kind of on the payroll, so she kind of has to do that. And then for those of you who are shy in our audience tonight, you can email your questions in to mayiask@uw.edu. And for our friends out there in live stream world, that goes for you as well. There's also a microphone in the aisle over here. And when you do ask a question, I ask that you please be considerate of our friends in the audience and pose your question in the form of an actual question. Thanks, I know, right? And then we do have a moderator tonight who will be moderating the Q&A, and this lovely person is the chair of the Comparative History of Ideas, or CHID, Dr. Tony Lucero. I know, we love him. We love him, big love. And if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to say hello to your neighbor sitting next to you, please, and introduce yourself. Look at all the love happening in this room. You guys make me proud. I'm so proud. Okay, but we do have to keep going. We want to acknowledge the departments that helped host our guest this evening, which is the School of Law and the Comparative History of Ideas. And without much further ado, our speaker tonight will be introduced by UW faculty in the School of Law, who is also an expert in the fields of business and human rights, anti-corruption, and commercial law and development, Professor Anita Ramasastry.
Yvette, thank you so much. Good evening. I am Anita Ramasastry. As Yvette mentioned, I'm a law professor at the University of Washington, and I run a graduate program in sustainable development. I also wear another hat, which is in the Office of Global Affairs at the university as the Director of Faculty Engagement. And I'm really pleased here, along with my colleague Tony Lucero and the Office of Public Lectures, thank you, Kate Golden and Yvette, to bring this wonderful scholar and community organizer to Seattle and to the University of Washington, where he has been working and meeting with students and faculty and staff across the campus to have a real discussion around what role can we all play as individuals and what role can universities and institutions of higher education play in confronting legacies of racism and colonization that they actually were part of, right? What can we do? And this is a question that we need to ask and a debate we need to have and think about how we move forward. And so really looking forward to the lecture today. Professor K. Wayne Yang writes about decolonization and everyday epic organizing, often with his frequent collaborator Eve Tuck, and sometimes for an avatar called La Pat Person. Doctors Tuck and Yang wrote Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, and they edit the book series Indigenous and Decolonizing Studies in Education. And written by La Pat Person, writings by La Pat Person include the book A Third University is Possible. Now, currently, Professor Yang and Eve Tuck are convening the Land Relationships Super Collective with several Indigenous, Black, and people of color-led community organizations engaged in land-based projects. And Dr. Yang is also Provost of Muir College and Professor in Ethnic Studies at UC San Diego, where he co-founded the Indigenous Futures Institute and Black Lake Water. Now, we've been fortunate to have 2 rain-free days, so Professor Yang thinks that Seattle is just marvelous, and it is. So I'm so glad that the visit is off to a good start. So please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Dr. Wayne K. Yang. Thanks so much.
I think we can get the slides going. And I would like to thank Yvette Moy for the amazing welcome, and Kate Golden, who did all the organizing, and from the people at Office of Public Lectures, Denise Major, who arranged my travel, obviously Professors Anita Ramasastry and Tony Lucero, all the great people I've met, and can't name you all. I'd like to acknowledge also the places that informed this talk. So this is, I think, might be my first time here on Coast Salish lands. I can't remember. It's kind of strange because I've seen the Space Needle on TV so many times. I think I've been there. But I'd like to thank the waters of this place, the peoples, the fire stewards in particular, the language keepers, just all these notifications just showed up on my laptop here. That's really odd. Okay, let me close these. There we go. All right, we still good? Good. Wow. So, I'd like to acknowledge Kumeyaay territory. So San Diego's where I came from, and the Kumeyaay Nation extends across the U.S.-Mexico border. I left my sunblock at home when I came here. And I'd like to acknowledge Lishan Ohlone territory, otherwise known as Oakland, California, San Francisco Bay Area. I'll be referring to some of that tonight. And I was asked to speak about anything I wanted, so I offered 3 talks, and it was very clear that my hosts were insistent I talk about the book 30 Universities Possible. So thank you for pushing me in there. And the truth is, I haven't read this book in a long time. I'm likely less familiar of it than many of the people in this room. And so I apologize if I get anything wrong today. And I especially apologize to La Paperson if I speak for her falsely. So I'm asking for a little bit of grace. And so I did what every good student does. Didn't do the reading. So I Googled it. And you know, it's really interesting what readers and reviewers have put online, and there's some things that stuck out, certain quotes that resonated with them. And so I decided I would flow off of that. So here's one of them. So some of the things that I noticed people kind of appreciated online was these sort of dedication moments in this La Paperson book. And here's one of them. It says, "For you who likes to create a mess out of colonial apparatuses." And it's really like one of these dedications inserted throughout the book. It is a book that is written as a message in a bottle, and it's hoping to get to someone with love. And so it's just amazing that it reaches anybody, but that's why it's written that way. And then the you is really interesting because really the you are these potential cyborgs, right? And so I'm talking about you here today. Are you cyborg? So for you who didn't do the reading like me, cyborg is a word that's in the book, and yes, it's spelled with an S, and it's a word that I made up. It's meant for you to apply to yourself if you want, and I hope you have fun with it, and I also hope you build a decolonizing machine while you're at it, for you who likes to create a mess out of colonial apparatuses. This is some artwork from Ana Rios Rojas. She's a professor at Colgate University, and she actually did it for this wait, where are we? Here we go. Is this advancing automatically? So she actually did it for this book. And the word cyborg, or the theory of cyborgs really comes from foundational feminist thinkers in science and technology studies. That's when it's spelled with a C. And they said we are cyborg in a literal sense. Like we are cybernetically enhanced or restored organisms. And the most obvious examples are things like glasses. You know, that is a technology that enhances your vision or restores it. Your cell phone, this is a technology we all carry around. We have this computer that is more or less attached to us. But there are other forms of technology as well. So law is a technology, right? Particularly legal personhood is a type of technology that not everyone actually has. And not everyone, literally, not everyone has legal personhood, even though they are people. School is a whole set of technologies, and that's what I'm kind of going to dive into. So think about diplomas. They are a type of they are a part of that technology that certifies you as a thinking organism, that certifies you as intelligent. And for some people, legal personhood is dependent on their certification as intelligent. So just think about Britney Spears and conservatorship. I know that's a touchy topic for Britney Spears fans, but also dreamers. So the dream, like the whole argument for undocumented students is predicated on this, but we're students and we're intelligent and we're going to contribute to society. It's a very neoliberal concept, right? So, so intelligence is not a small, innate thing. It's a legal, political concept. So, so the S in cyborg here, which is the part that is added on by this Law Paperson work, it refers to how we're not only part machine, but we're actually connected to all kinds of machines, systems of machines. And we project our actions and our intentions through these assemblages of machines that are connected to other machines. And most basic example would be like Instagram. You project yourself through Instagram. You can dox someone on Instagram. You can troll someone on Instagram. You can flirt on Instagram, right? And your purchasing power in Amazon, or let's say online trading, you participate in capitalism how you can. And so this is captured in this network, this artwork, which is the image in the bottom right by Professor Rojas. And then this is an image from the anime Ghost in the Shell, which some of you might be familiar with. So a brain wired into all these machines and wired into networks. And the reason I write this is to express to you who might be lonely out there and thinking you're the only cyborg, that you are cyborg, and it's okay. And it's literally the name of a movie by Park Chung-wook, so that's why it's in there. Moving along, today I would like you to really think about all the kinds of cyborgs that are out there. Particularly, I'm going to focus on native cyborgs, indigenous cyborgs. And I'm drawing on my good friend and family member, Dr. Angie Morrell, who is Klamath Modoc, and she's got this great piece in this book that is actually published by one of the editors is Wayne Au at UW Bothell, and it's a great piece called "Teaching a Native Feminist Read." It's fun read. It's about pop culture. And what she basically says in this is that as a Native person, you have to see Native people in media everywhere or you're never gonna see them, right? So she talks about like Scott Lyons talks about seeing Mr. Spock as Indigenous, and she talks about examples like that. So I want us to think that way. She's a scholar, writer, artist, and she's the director of Native American and Tribal Programs for Oregon State University, the Extension and Engagement Program. So let's read Indigenous Cyborgs Everywhere tonight. Here's one image I want to start with. Anybody know what this is? It's from Reservation Dogs, right? And this is the beloved and ridiculed Indian clinic, Indian health clinic. It's great, but it's like, and it's run by these women who are the aunties, and it was founded by probably their mothers, right, or their grandmothers. And this was pointed out to me by a good friend, collaborator, Chig Lowry, who is a nationally renowned Native author and graphic novelist. And he said that the California Rural Indian Health Board, for example, was founded by Native women. And he said they're these Native women who created these institutions that exist today. And they did it mostly in the 70s. Another collaborator of mine, Heather Panchetti Daly, who is Kumeyaay Ipai Nation of Santa Isabel, her mother, Dorothy Bailey Panchetti, was on the founding board of the, it's called the Indian Health Clinic down in Southern California. And importantly, Dorothy Panchetti went to boarding schools. So this is kind of important. And some of you may feel this way because many of you are attending school now, or you work at one. So I would argue that these are cyborgs, right? These are cyborg women, Native women, who through their technological enhancements of law or access to education, were able to turn that around and work for Indigenous sovereignty and health and for the future. And so what does this have to do with colonization, decolonization? So I write with Eve Tuck, as was mentioned, a Nanga scholar, a wonderful friend. And we are usually known for what we say decolonization isn't. That's what I hear anyways, right? So So we wanted to sometimes say, well, let's say what it is. And so we drew a very simple diagram in this book, the preface of this book, and it's decolonization, and there's an arrow, Indigenous futures. And the idea is, and Eve is now a professor of Indigenous Studies and the new director of the Center for Indigenous Studies at New York University. So she's still up to things. So the arrow here is a toward. And the book is called Toward What Justice? And it marks that decolonization is aiming towards Indigenous futures. The arrow is an indicator of intention, of futurity. And for those of you who are like, does that mean a future only for Indigenous people? It's like, that's not actually what Indigenous means. Indigenous is not just Indigenous people, it's the world, it's the more than human world. So Indigenous futures are abundant futures, they're inclusive futures, they're the futures we're meant to have. So if you need a simple definition, draw a picture, right? So a little bit first, I think we should talk about what colonization is, although I find it very boring, so I'm going to speed through this. And I have a few images, and we're going to try to get to settler colonialism, but if you want to know more, I think this is a great book, right, and by Gerald Horne. But often we think about colonization in these three categories. There's extraction colonialism, and this is usually when an empire goes to another place and mines or steals people or takes the food or the other resources. And so it's this extraction of resources from a quote unquote distant colony. And you take it back to the center of empire and increase the wealth of the empire, right? The other form of colonization people call internal colonialism. And this is really the control and suppression of populations inside a nation, such as through laws or prisons, etc. It is a creation of inequality. I'm sure many of you can relate to how that plays out. Interestingly enough, Adolf Hitler in his book Mein Kampf, he mentions internal colonization, colonialism, as a method that he's going to explore, right? So settler colonialism, it's a relatively new on the theorizing of how colonialism works, even though arguably the foundational thinkers like let's say Frantz Fanon was really writing about settler colonialism in Algeria, right? But settler colonialism is about land. It is about coming to a place and taking the land, and whoever was there, they're gonna have to give it up, and then making it your new home and becoming the quote unquote new native of this land. So that means like I show up somewhere and I say, I'm gonna give land to you, please defend it. I'm going to give it to land to you. Please mine it. Please build a corporation. I'm going to deny you land. You're going to work here, or we're going to try to control you so you don't come to be landed in any kind of way. And then, of course, if you're from here, we're going to get rid of you, right? And so the complications of settler colonialism is that all our relationships are actually defined through very twisted ideas of land. Land becomes property, some people become property, other people must disappear from the land, right? And so they are land-based relationships, they're just twisted land-based relationships. This is kind of important. So, and then the other thing with settler colonialism is there's still extractive colonialism happening and there's still internal colonialism happening, but it's all in the same place. The seat of empire is where your home is, right? So my point is not so much about settler colonialism, but that our relationships through land we're all in bad relationships to one another, like we are. It doesn't matter if you're Indigenous, from here or from somewhere else, if you're settler, if you're a migrant, if you're someone who's denied being a settler, but are not necessarily from here, like it is this weird twisted land relationship. So the reason I'm bringing this up is another way to think about it is we have to restore right relationship to land. So, so this is another sentence, again, I'm trying to give something pithy. Decolonization is the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. And what I like about this sentence is everyone has to stop and say, rematriation, what's that? And that's what we want. We want people to stop thinking these are English words with definitions and understand that these are this really hard things we're trying to capture in English, and they'd probably be better in an Indigenous language of that area. So one of the members of the Land Relationship Super Collective, Sogorea Te Land Trust, which is from the Lishan Ohlone territory, I hope I mentioned it, that's Oakland, California. They define rematriation as the restoration of right relationships with land, with water, with air, in the right relationship with one another, with human persons and non-human persons. It's a restoration of languages to the land, of the teaching ability of the land to guide us. It is the return of indigenous lands to indigenous hands, meaning indigenous people will now steward and care for the land again. It's not property, right? It's not individual indigenous people owning property. It is a worldview of the restoration of right relationship. So my close friend Eve Tuck I heard her give this example once of what rematriation is, and she's Unanga, so they're from the islands, the Aleutian Islands, and so they fish, right? And so she said, you ever go fishing in a boat, and you catch a fish, and you put it in the boat, and it flops around, and then it managed to jump out of the boat back in the water, and it swims away. She said, that's rematriation. It's that fish is off to lead the life it was meant to lead. Doesn't mean we don't eat fish, right? So that's more complicated. You can talk to an indigenous person about that. But all this to say is, just to borrow some language from this initiative, is we live in a wounded world, and to heal a wounded world, we need to go to the future we are meant to live, and it is an indigenous future, all right? So a little bit on this idea of apocalypse, because that was the title of the settler colonial thing, and I think this is important. Cutcha Risling Baldy, she's been talking about this for over 10 years, right? She teaches The Walking Dead, like the zombie apocalypse, and she said, you need to watch The Walking Dead. And she teaches American Indian Studies. And she's teaching this to non-native students. She said, because when you watch The Walking Dead, you understand what it means to be native in California, right? Because like a bunch, like zombies, whoa, we lost something here. Awesome, all right. So let me know if this turns off, okay? Because zombies show up, they start just murdering everyone, your family and everything like that. And it's the end of the world. They're poisoning your waters, they're taking over your lands, and then they destroy your food systems, and you're hiding, and now it's the post-apocalypse, and you're trying what to do with what you have, right? The world has ended, and you're trying to build something anew, and that's the California Indian reality. I could talk more about that some other time, but the reason this is interesting to me is that's from her perspective, a California Native perspective, the reality we're in. And I reference I Am Legend because this is a Will Smith movie, which I really like. There's 2 alternate endings, which is always kind of cool. But it's based on, I think, Richard Matheson book from the 1950s. And in this book, same thing happens. This man holes up in his house after the zombie apocalypse happened. Everyone's getting murdered. But the weird thing is, these zombies, they start to evolve. Like, they build civilizations, they start speaking languages, they start making art, they create museums, they create universities, right? And they're like, maybe he should come out and join them. And it's like, but do you trust that they're not going to murder you again? Some of you might know exactly how this feels. So do you participate in this new society? What do you do in these institutions? And this is cyborg. This is the cyborg context. It's a post-apocalyptic context. So back to these cyborgs. One of the things I want to think about tonight is I actually think indigenous peoples are kind of OG cyborgs, especially like people who built these clinics and institutions. And I want to argue actually that indigenous people are OG artificial intelligences. I know that's kind of weird, so I'm going to get to that. But I think it's kind of a cool idea, and I randomly, this was fate, because I was Googling something. I was Googling spam, because I'm interested in spam. And this came up. Spam is provided free of charge to many artificial intelligences on reservations. I was like, oh my God, there's AIs on reservations and they're being fed spam. And then I realized it stood for American Indians, but I'm like, it's a great, Google told me it's true. So I actually think there should be an indigenous history of artificial intelligence. And I would love to read that. I'm not going to write it. I think this is a great project for a Native writer, a Native feminist writer, and maybe a great dissertation for someone here. But if I were to advise someone, I think it could proceed in this order, going from monsters to orphans to robots to cyborg systems and to sovereignties. And that's kind of what I want to cover really quickly. So let's go to monsters. So there's an S in Scyborgs, and one of the jokes that's in the book, maybe it's not a joke, but it's a reference, is to Scylla, which is, one of these great Greek monsters, feminized, gendered feminine, and, sailors avoided, it's a destructive thing. And this is a interesting thing to me because this idea that monsters are in places, they're in these monstrous places, and they just by nature kill humans. It has followed colonialism. So everywhere colonialism has gone, they've seen monsters. I'm going to breeze through this. So like, in Mexico, they saw, who's now Malintzin, or it's called La Malinche, the betrayer, right? And Doña Marina, if you're trying to be nice, right? But there's also, at the same time period, the rise of this monstrous myth, La Llorona, right? It's the woman who drowned her babies in the river, and she haunts the rivers. And they're connected, right? Like some people thought Malintzin was actually La Llorona, like she actually did those things. She killed her children, she didn't, right? So everywhere they go, they see monsters, particularly monstrous women. In the Philippines, there's the Manananggal, which are kind of like these vampire type, often now feminized women. And Bliss Slim talks a lot about this in her work, The Scholar at UC Irvine. I've also read pieces, I'm blanking on the author, who've connected, if you draw a map of where these Aswang or Manananggal sightings are the most common, they're in places of Spanish colonial contact, right? And the CIA weaponized this myth back in the 50s to fight off like revolutionaries by saying these revolutionaries are Aswang. They're bloodsuckers, right? So another thing is like the monstrosity of gender. So this is a great film. I'm sure many of you have seen it, Kumuina. And this is about a teacher, Hina Wangkalu, who is third gender. And this is a traditional Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli concept. It's a very, very important figure, a very important teacher, these transgender figures. And yet under colonization, this was made into a crime. And so a lot of these are matriarchal women, leaders who are made to be monsters in order to enforce patriarchal colonial systems, right? But one of my favorite monsters is, of course, Stitch. And I like that. There's a lot to learn from Stitch. And actually, Angie Morrill writes about this, right? And but Stitch is this amazing monster. And I want to ask somebody in here, what is Stitch's crime? Like here he is being judged. What's his crime? Being born. Yeah, he's a crime of existence. He's committed no crime, he is the crime, right? And it's this idea that the monstrous nature that Stitch is supposed to not exist anywhere, and he's assumed to be a non-person and cannot be salvaged, right? And this is really interesting because that means anyone can kill Stitch and they're in the right, even though he's done nothing. Right? And this is the true for most monsters, right? And that's an interesting academic theory around this by Professor Gambin at Stanford. And he's written about this for 20 years. It's called Homo sacer. And Homo sacer is this medieval concept that there's a type of person who is outside of the law, and it's called the sacred man or the accursed man. It's sort of a double meaning, Homo sacer. And essentially, anyone can kill this person with impunity. It is not a crime, right? That's Stitch. What's interesting about this is we've invoked Homo sacer in native law in this country, right? So the Modoc War, which was a group of Modoc people who said, we're not going to stay on the reservation. We're going to go back to our lands. And they, it's like a movie. They fought off the U.S. cavalry for, I don't remember how long, months, right? Just with a few rifles. And then eventually there was like some peace talks which didn't go well. And then at the end, they were executed. I can't remember how many, but all these people were executed. And it was a sham. And it went all the way to Supreme Court. It's like, how can you execute people without trial, without due process? And they invoked Homo sacer. It's because they are not people. And anyone can kill them with impunity. Interestingly, when the whole Guantanamo Bay thing with can we keep these people indefinitely locked up without a charge, the lawyer defended this, the U.S. president's right to do this by invoking Homo sacer in the Modoc War. So this is not just like weirdness. It's only weirdness to people who didn't live through the apocalypse. It's kind of like didn't live through the zombie. It's like they're still doing it, right? So the other thing I find interesting is Lilo is also a monster in her schools, in her own lands. Her parents are dead. She's raised by her sister Nani, and it's a kind of a queer kinship, and they're orphans, right? And the threat is always the state is going to take her away on her own lands, right? And that gets me to orphans. So this is anybody know what this is an image of? Very famous island in San Francisco Bay Area. Alcatraz, before it was a prison, they actually imprisoned 19 Hopi men there. And it's because the community, the Hopi community, I think it was Oraibi, they refused to send their kids to boarding schools. They just refused. And so they said, well, let's just try to persuade people. Let's try to bribe people to send their kids. And they're like, we're not sending your kids to your school, right? So then they said, well, let's withhold their fuel in the wintertime. Let's withhold their government rations like Spam, right? I don't think it was Spam back then, but like, cheese and the commodity rations, the wheat that goes into fry bread now, right? And they said they still wouldn't do it. So then they said use force. So then they tried to use force, on the reservation. And then that didn't work. And they said divide and conquer. So turn them into friendlies and hostiles. And just label that way, and then send the hostiles to Alcatraz. And this is, mind you, I think it's Arizona, all the way to San Francisco Bay Area, and they spent over a year there, right, for refusing to send their children. And then the community decided, well, we don't want to be orphans that way. Let's bring them back, and let's send our kids to the schools. And schools, boarding schools are truly orphaning processes because the whole concept is to remove you from your family, from your culture, from your land, from your language, from everything that is you, right? This is an image from Spokane. Anybody know what this is? So this is a ritual that was done widely across the United States called the last arrow ritual. Doesn't matter. And the idea is they would give a Native woman a purse and say, you are now a white woman and you're gonna live inside the house. I don't know how white women felt about that, but it's like, you're a domestic, and so give up the lands that you tend to and you learn from. And for the men, it was like, you give up hunting and take up the plow and shoot your last arrow. So these are called last arrow ceremonies, right? And these were so big, like they had to like buy like 500 plows or something. And when they did this, it was the idea that, and now you are no longer part of the land. So you're alienated from the land. And moreover, the land you're on is now alienable, meaning you can sell it, which was really the intent, meaning I can buy it, I can give it to somebody else, right? So these are orphaning processes, and I want to say that this is part of, I think, a kind of cyborg history, because it's like now you're in these institutions, right? And now you're institutionalized. And another Disney character, I think, who's like this is actually the Little Mermaid. So, in the original Hans Christian Andersen story, which is actually not even the original, mermaids were really monsters. Like her sisters would sing to sailors. I mean, that's like sirens, right? And it's like, the sea is great, come live with us. They couldn't. But the concept is that she's a monster. She doesn't have a soul. That's the whole thing. And so shouldn't she want to become human? Shouldn't she leave this whole world, this whole kingdom, and get legs? And learn a voice, learn English, right, or whatever language. And she doesn't actually ever marry this guy. Like, she becomes his pet. She's called a foundling, and you can sort of see from the illustration. And then she has to dance at his wedding, which is wild, right, on these new prosthetic legs. And so she has to learn to walk, to talk another language. She gets these prostheses and these new technologies. So language is a technology, human education is a technology, and this gets this idea that she's actually a robot, right? And what I learned from this artist, C. Ree, who's part of the Super Futures Hunt Collective, they had a piece here at the Wing Luke, which I was told to go to, is orphan and robot are the same word. So orphan means in Greek to change alliance, to move into class unconnected to others, to lose free status, to go from free to slave, from stranded to bonded. And in the Slavic languages where the vowel is reversed, that's how it goes from OR to RO, or the word robot. The word robot first appears formally with this 1920 play by Czech writer Karel Čapek, and it was called Rosum, Universal Robot. And the idea was this class of being that was highly educated and so smart they could function autonomously. So they used to be called automatons or something, right? And so it's not that they follow commands. It's like they know what to do. The thing is, they know what to do so well that they'll never break any rules. You don't have to tell them what the rules are. I mean, that's like the function of education in this world, right? And that's where the word robot comes from, right? And since it's Black History Month, it just has to remind you of the founder of Black History Month, Carter G. Woodson, who said, when you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about telling him to do this or that, or go here or yonder, or go to the back door. If there's no back door, he'll cut one for his own special benefit. His education makes it necessary. I mean, this is about robots, right? This is the same concept, written actually close proximity in the same time. And I want you to think about this image and like how uncanny these images are of boarding schools, right? Where they're trying to show this transformation of monster to orphan to robot, right? They're saying these boarding schools are gonna work. These people who you thought by nature were like Stitch and just simply unintelligent, savage, we can turn them into highly functioning, passable humans, right? And what is interesting about this, I got this actually from the UW Digital Archives. This is like curriculum for women and men's, boys, girls, boarding schools. And what they're really being trained in this like awesome education is to become servants. And this is very common, was like, we're gonna teach you English, we're gonna teach you how to be a domestic, we're gonna teach you how to work in factories, and you're gonna become workers without land, right? So getting back to these weird land relationships, right? So I'm gonna own a house, and you're gonna come work for me. Congratulations, right? So, so these are very much robot-making places, boarding schools, and they were worse than that. This is sort of, at their best, this is publicly what they were meant to do. But that gets us to cyborgs, because it's like, well, what am I gonna do with this education? Am I actually gonna do what Carter G. Woodson warned us not to do, right? And that's cyborgs. So back to cyborgs. So this era of institution building was not by accident. It was cyborg work. It happened in the 70s. And so this is something that my colleague Heather Ponchetti-Daly, who's a scholar of 20th century Native American politics and so on and so forth, she loves to ask the question, and let's see who knows the answer. Who was the best president for Native American people? US president. 1970s? Nixon. Correct answer. I was going to give you a can of Spam, but I wish I'd brought it now. But I just thought it was too tacky. But yeah, and you know, Heather loves to tell the story, and she just cackles because people hate that story, right? They're like, how could it be Nixon? And Nixon actually well, we'll get into what happens under his administration, but leading into his administration, it was the termination policy, which was worse than the boarding schools. It was saying tribes will now end as political entities. So like when they terminated certain communities, like one of the Klamath reservations, they were timber rich. Not only did they end being a tribal nation, they gave up all their lands, right? And people got a small payout, right? And so this was, the purpose of termination was to eliminate all native tribes from the country. And this was a long, decades-long policy. So this was again like this weird post-apocalyptic thing. It's like, can we trust this zombie society? They're doing it to us again. They're killing us again, right? But what what Heather likes to tell me, Dr. Daly likes to tell me, is that like in her reservation, the infrastructure for water, running water and electricity were built during the Nixon era from these Nixon policies. Her father was part of that. I think he was tribal chair. And she likes to point out this person, which is Wallace Newman. And Wallace Newman was a Southern California Luiseño from La Jolla band of Mission Indians. And he played in the Rose Bowl for USC at their first Rose Bowl. Like, he was this great athlete, and he became a coach of multiple sports at Nixon's college, which I'm forgetting the name of his college. It's terrible. Whittier. So, and Nixon was mostly benched, but apparently he loved Wallace Newman, right? And he writes about it. This is an image from the Nixon Library, right? And he attributes so much of his belief in Indian policy, the reversal of it, to this relationship, right? And what they do is he actually uses the word self-determination. Like, we should strengthen the self-determination and sovereignty of these native nations. We should, but the person who really did this work, so I think the Nixon story is appealing, but I want you to, I'll get back to this, right? Actually, no, I'll talk about it now. I want you to imagine being Wallace Newman, right? And you play some sports, you go to college, this weird institution, right? And you become this coach, and you have these kids who are non-native kids, and what do you do with them, right? This is the post-apocalyptic reality. And what is this relationship? And yet it's all these things that got him there. The mother or the grandmother went to boarding school. He actually went to boarding school. That got them to this place that all this time, how can you not be questioning, should I even be here, right? And then he comes to influence the President of the United States, right? Did he plan for that? I don't know, right? But I want you to think about that for yourself. So I'm going to ask you a question. So, another cyborg that was really behind the Nixon administration policy is Forrest Girard, and it connects actually to Seattle. He was staff for your senator, Scoop Jackson, right? Who is also credited. So they usually credit Scoop Jackson, a few other people, Nixon with all these policies. But the true architect of the end of termination and the restoration of self-determination and tribal culture and language, the policies that made this possible at the federal level, was Forrest Girard. And so a cyborg, right? And just to close the loop around this, just so you know, like with the Hopis, they took over the schools as best as they could. And there's a great book on this by Chanina Lomewaima and Professor Teresa McCarty, these two great scholars, and they talk about this idea of hopification. It's like you get this colonial institution and you hopify it, and you take what you can out of it. And so anyways, check this out. But the question I'd like to ask you, and I'm glad, and you can only have 2 minutes on this because I'm at 34 minutes. Are you cyborg? Am I a cyborg? And then a more specific question is, am I a Newman, whether you're Indigenous from here or Indigenous from elsewhere or not Indigenous? And if so, who are my Nixons? Because that's really the cyborg question, right? That's the post-apocalyptic reality. And I'd like you to, because you introduced yourself to the person next to you, thanks to Yvette, I'd like you to talk to the person next to you for 30 seconds and then take turns. All right. Are you a cyborg? Are you a Newman? Who are your Nixons? If you haven't taken turns, please take turns. I'm very sorry to cut you off, but I only have 45 minutes, and I gave you like 3 of mine already. And I'll take 3 out of the Q&A. That's what I'll do. All right, but please continue afterwards. You know, this is such a nice, we're like in a nightclub in here. It's such a beautiful space. Now we went from monsters, orphans, robots to cyborgs, and now I want to go to systems and sovereignties, right? So systems, there's, back to this picture, really the thing that, you know, is trying to be emphasized in this small book is that your powers, your cyborg powers are not that you're mechanical or you're like smart. It's that you are connected to all these things that maybe they shouldn't let you have access to, all right? And some images are like from Sleep Dealer, right? And there's a cost to this because if you've ever seen this film, you know, this person is doing labor in the United States by connecting to robots, so we don't have to have immigrants from Mexico. They can just stay in Mexico and like cut the grass or whatever, rock the babies here. And he slowly goes blind, but check it out, Alex Rivera's Sleep Dealer, right? But he's connected into this huge technology, and who knows what you could do with that, right? Here's a great image of from Reginald Jackson, who's a professor at Michigan, who's shared with that. And I'm going to just keep pushing forward, but I want you to think about like how your reach extends far beyond your corporeal body as cyborg, right? And the example I love is R2-D2. So R2-D2, when it plugs in or she plugs into the Death Star, she becomes a Death Star. I mean, suddenly, and this is like a great image I found online, sorry, I don't know who did it, so I didn't credit it. But yeah, she becomes a Death Star, and it's really she who blows up the Death Star, has the plans for its destruction, also opens the doors so people can escape, right? It's not Luke Skywalker who destroys the Death Star. It's without R2-D2, they would have found somebody else like to throw the torpedo down the drain, right? It's like, it's R2-D2 who brings the end of this killing machine. Sovereignties. This is a little complicated. Never really talked about this before. Hope to get it right. So this is a sort of aside. It connects to Washington, and this is a very famous court case for in racial science where Bhagat Singh Thend sued for citizenship, and it went all the way to Supreme Court, right? And he sued, first he actually got citizenship in Washington, in the state of Washington, and then it was revoked 4 days later, because they're like, you're not white. And then he got it in Oregon, and they did the same thing. So it went to Supreme Court, and he made these arguments of Supreme Court that I think are somewhat cyborg arguments, like they manipulate the law, right? And he says, like, actually, you know, I served in World War I, so I'm a veteran. I own property. In India, I'm high caste, right? And so we're basically like, you know, the privileged elite, like y'all, right? You know? And then he said, the stunning argument, he's like, and I'm Aryan. Our people are from the Caucasus Mountains, where the word Caucasian comes from. And they're like, dang, you got us, right? And they know they ruled. They said, you're right, scientifically you're Caucasian, but everybody knows you're not white. And so they ruled against them. Yeah. Amazing, right? Amazing. But what I find interesting about this, no shade on Bhagat Singh Thend, is that to try to get citizenship, he had to prove that he was a privileged white land-owning man. Right? And I think some of you might feel this way in the academy. It's like, is this what I got to do? Is this what I have to do? And I think that that is the contradiction of the systems we're in, which is, this is a quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, but she says, the central contradiction of modernity is freedom. And it's because being free means legally certain things. And what I find interesting about this is I've been talking about human indigenous people, but now I want to talk about non-human indigenous people, or whatever we should call these beings. And so I want to start with this elephant. Anybody know the name of this elephant? Happy is a Southeast Asian elephant in, I think, the Bronx Zoo. And it was very famous because in 2017, I want to say, they did this Muir test, and they said, oh, you're self-aware, right? And they argued for intelligence. This is really deep, the argument for intelligence, and therefore personhood. You think about AI these days, like, that's the argument, like, are they self-aware, right? I think self-awareness is overrated for a number of reasons, but like, and then in 2018, they sued for habeas corpus by the, I think it's called the Non-Human Rights Association. And you know, it's like, kind of remarkable. So habeas corpus means that you can't keep them in prison because they're self-aware and they have personhood. It was ruled last year, or a little over a year ago in 2022 by the U.S. not the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, but it was ruled that no, they're not a person. And one of the pressing arguments is like, what's going to happen to all the animals, right? So it's pretty interesting. I'm going to skip this. This is from Neuromancer. I thought it was really cool. Skip it. So some successful lawsuits has been the Whanganui River in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and in 2017 became the first river to be granted personhood, right, and therefore certain rights. And then there's been other examples of this. Here's another one, is Mar Menor in Spain was granted a sort of legal personality, right? So not quite personhood, as an ecosystem. And this gets me back to sovereignty, believe it or not, in The Little Mermaid, because, you know, Little Mermaid is basically, she comes from a sovereign kingdom. And I think that Ursula maybe had it right. Ursula's like, Triton is selling us out. He's selling us our sovereignty. I'm going to take over, right? Of course, you know, she's this witch that looks sort of black and black dress, and, you know, it's very interesting. She's the monster, right? But maybe she had it right, like, because the underwater kingdom is all kinds of non-human beings, right? And it reminds me of Craig Womack's work. This is a very famous, awesome book called Drowning in Fire. Main character's name is Josh, and it's like follows him from boyhood to adulthood. And as a boy, he has this experience where he is being pulled down in a lake that they all swim in. They're creek, I believe, and they're all swimming in there, and the tie snakes start pulling him down. And tie snakes is a kind of a well-known monstrous kind of being in Creek and Muskogee and some other communities, right? And what's interesting is Womack says, or one of these knowledge bearers to Josh says, you know, these tie snakes, they're not your friends, but they're a sovereign kingdom. They're their own people. And if you treat them with respect, maybe one day they'll help you, right? And they describe these monsters in such amazing ways, right? Like the head of a deer, they are their own people, right? They are our relatives who are independent from us. And of course, they don't have to be our allies, right? And so when Womack describes sovereignty, he actually, and he's a literary theorist as well, and he came up a long time ago with this phrase, this concept of literary sovereignty, which is, so sovereignty is not just a political system. It's not like supremacist sovereignty where I control you politically, you know, I make the laws. It's like a deeper knowledge of self-determination in the world, and the rights of beings, and the rights of worlds, and the rights of worlds to conflict even, right? Like that the tie snakes might actually kill us, right? And so I want to offer this as, this is what actually being a cyborg is about, right? And if you want to think of another way about decolonization, is how are you supporting sovereignty, indigenous sovereignty, the sovereignty of indigenous peoples, lands, non-human kin, right? And I think one of my favorite words that approximates sovereignty, or sovereignty doesn't even come close, is the Kanaka Maoli word, ea. I learned this through a hip hop album from the 1990s. I don't know if you all know it, Sudden Rush, but ea, and this is written in I think the Mauna Kea syllabus by Jamaica Heolimile Mele Kalani Osario, and she's quoting Neolani Goodyear Kapua. But she says, ea is a beautiful word. It can mean sovereignty, rule, independence. It can also mean life, air, breath. It means to rise. It means to resurge. And most of all, it means a land. Moving words. So sovereignty is not an English word. So whenever you see indigenous people, you just think it's not an English word, so don't look it up in the dictionary, right? And I would say, I would point you to this, or point you to a word in that language, in their language. And so going back to, are you cyborg, and believe it or not, I'm wrapping up. I think I'm doing, oh, my timer stopped, that's why. I'm way over time, huh, Yvette? Okay, I'm wrapping up. So This is a passage from this little book, and I think the difference between cyborgs and other organisms in the machine is a cyborg grasps at her decolonial possibilities. She knows her broomstick can't carry her beyond colonization because in modernity, freedom is the greatest contradiction. Like, you can't be free as an individual on your broomstick. Like, you have to turn that broomstick around and start sweeping, right? You might be able to rake together a machine, a decolonizing golem, right? So I guess the last message I want to leave you with, or second to last message, is like how to be cyborg is actually very simple. It's like, think about the women who created these health clinics. Like, they were sweeping the floors, right? They're cooking for people. They're finding the medicines. They're trying to hire some doctors. They're trying to get their kids to go to boarding school and try to get their kids to survive boarding school so they can come back, right? It's everyday work as long as it furthers sovereignty and indigenous futures, right? So the broomstick, to me, is that everyday work. And to quote my now friend Max Lieberone, who's a scientist in Newfoundland and runs an anti-colonial research lab. It's pretty cool. They say, do your chores. That's all you got to do. Do your chores for sovereignty. Do your chores for indigenous futures. They're writing a book on chore theory, so look it up sometime. And I have a few photos that my students made of what it feels like to be a student. It's like you get these, you have these great powers, and what do you use them for? Studying, staring at your pen that you can levitate, right? Waiting for the elevator. It's like we all have cyborg powers. We have these superpowers, but we use them for pretty mundane activities to work for capitalism, to be honest, right? Resting in the library, or maybe coming into your power as a cyborg. So the last thing, I'm going to start where I ended, which is with the dedication. And the dedication of the book was for you, who are the business. And it is there's two references. The movie Blade Runner, if you ever saw it, there's a moment where, so there's a person who kills cyborgs, right? And there's a woman who finds out she's a cyborg, but she rescues this guy who's about to get killed by a cyborg by shooting the cyborg. So she kills one of her own, and she's so shaken up by it. And she's just shaking. He's like, you got the shakes, right? He's like, you get used to it. It's part of the business. And she says, I'm not part of the business. I am the business, right? And so that's the thing with cyborgs is you were made a monster, and now you have all these powers. The other reference is Miley Arvin, who's a professor at UC Riverside. She's got this short fiction story that starts off, we met at a conference. I just presented a paper about how cyborgs and animals are organizing their own communities against settler colonialism. What a great opening line, right? Thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate you. Thank you, take care.
Wayne, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that. It was very rich, and I don't know how you did it, but you made us nostalgic for R2-D2, Ursula, and Nixon all at the same time.
All right.
That was really. I just do want to encourage people to come on up to ask a question to the microphone. You can also ask online. May I ask at uw.edu, and I will be happy to read your question.
Yeah. Hi, online people.
Hello, online people. Please feel free to shoot in a question. While folks are gathering their courage to walk up to the mic and entering their questions online, I might take the moderator's privilege of just asking the very first question.
Thank you, yeah.
And again, I'm so grateful for how much you were able to bring together in this one beautiful lecture. It was so generous and hopeful and hard-hitting at the same time. But I guess maybe to ask a skeptical question, are cyborgs, from a kind of traditional revolutionary perspective, there's the feeling that you've got to blow up the machine. So you have to blow up the machine? You got to burn it all down. So are us being cyborgs in our own way? It's a beautiful theory of change, but is it just really compatible with? Is it an uneven war? Like we're dealing battle with huge institutions, huge market forces.
Yeah.
Are we just still the little guy that we always will be? I mean, is there a pessimistic kind of way to think about are a lot of cyborgs is just working in our own way, but just never accumulating the power that we wish we could?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. And I think the answer is sort of a yes. I think this sort of cyborg as a theory of change is just one of many ways you can engage the world, right? So I'm not trying to present it as the only way. And I know some of you are up to things, right? So that, do your thing. But I do think cyborg is like an everyday thing, right? And it's like we all have a day job, and it's a workplace. And how do we actually advance work that is for the future we're all supposed to have? I do draw from this idea of like we need to blow things up. I'm like, have you ever lived in a country where things are blown up? You probably wouldn't support that. Like, it's not going to lead to utopia. Like, so like we learned a lot from the Black Panther Party. They were created in Oakland. I've been so fortunate to meet a lot of these original Panthers, and they had an analysis, which was like, we are not going to win anything with guns. I mean, they had guns, and they said, right to bear arms. They're just like, if you can bear arms, we can bear arms, right? But they had an analysis that we are outgunned, right? And so what are we going to do? We are going to have survival programs. So they created the first health clinics. Before there were health clinics, they fed free breakfast for children before the schools did it, right? They had something like 120 survival programs. And I got to speak to Erica Huggins more than once, who's the highest ranking woman officer in the Panthers. And she said the survival programs was what we were really about, right? And one of the things I loved about their analysis was, let's be honest about what is possible, and let's do those things. Let's not be idealistic about what we wish we could do. And they ran for mayor of Oakland, right? I think Elaine Brown ran for mayor, or Huey Newton, and they lost, but they paved the way for the first Black mayor, right? It's like that's like cyborgs lose all the time, right? And so I think what I think is important about like the La Paperson and Cyborg, and like the need to write that for La Paperson is to be accountable to. It's not our ideologies that are going to save us, right? So there's so many great leaders who've shifted ideology multiple times in their life, but they've been true to one thing, which is I'm thinking about like Black liberation, for example. They were communists, and then they were civil rights people, and then they were environmentalists, but they've been always true to one thing, which is this concept of liberation that exceeds any American concept of freedom.
Hello, thank you again for that great talk. So I have a question that kind of follows on what you just spoke about. And what you just reminded me of was the Black Panther Party slogan, or a slogan that some of the Black Panther Party had, which was "survival pending revolution," was a slogan that was often spoken of. And when I think about that slogan, one thing that I always consider is, what is it that is doing the surviving? Is it the institution itself that one is a part of? Is it you as a part of that institution, or is it something else? And then as a way of considering that question, another way of thinking of what the institution does, or like the threat of the institution is, if there are no functioning institutions, then you become destitute, So destitution is the consequence of a failed institution. And so I'm wondering, if it's the destitute who we want to survive, what's the relationship of that to the institution and the institution's continued survival, which is what they put us to work in doing?
That's a really hard question. Could I ask you your name?
Muindi.
Muindi, yeah. I'm going to buy your books. I really admire your work. Thank you for the question. I think it's beyond my pay grade, that question. I'll just do what grad students should do, which is I'll cite somebody else. So I'm going to go with Gerald Visner, just because the whole survival versus survivance thing. And I think that what I think is important about learning from like this post-apocalyptic reality is that these are people who've already not survived, and yet they have, right? And Visner came up with survivance to go beyond sort of this idea of bare survival, right? Or somehow it's like we're just scraping by. Like even when you are, it's like no, we're going to sing songs, right? We're going to have humor, and these are the gifts that we're going to pass on. If they're not going to be bread, then it's going to be jokes, right? It's going to be stories. It's going to be sky stories to feed you. I sort of feel like I hear that from Panthers. I mean, Panthers are complicated. I'll just say. And so different ones will tell you different things. But like what I've heard from many of them was that was what we were thinking in the 70s. That's what we were thinking in the 60s, you know. I hope that's not what you're thinking now. That's kind of like what they do, right? They're like, that was kind of the theory of action in the 60s and 70s. I mean, there were lots of revolutionary groups who really believed that revolution was going to happen in their day, you know, and I know a lot of them. And honestly, I don't want to be like them, and I don't want to go to jail. Like, I don't want to do any of those things, and my mother doesn't want me to either, right? So, and so for me, like for me, cyborg fear, you know, as a theory of action is like a feminist theory of action. You know, it's really like La Paperson writing to people that she loves, right? And it's like, you don't want the people you love to, you actually don't want them to be revolutionaries. If they have to be, you know, you sort of pray and weep for them, right? So, so I don't think these institutions, like for the Hopi, they never thought like, oh, this is a good institution. They're just like, well, if you're gonna have to be there, we're gonna do what we can until we have our own. And when they take away our own, we'll do something else, right? And I think that has sort of been the lesson. I'm more hopeful than that. Like what I think with the cyborg theory is, I actually think it's contagious. Like one of the things I like to say is, I might change this line, but one of the things I like to say is, I think I found my project, and I think it's your project too, and it's decolonization. Now I'm more thinking like maybe it's rematriation, maybe it's sovereignty, right? Maybe it's something that isn't so like, you know, the antithesis of this. It is actually this, and it is, you know, there's multiple worlds. Even underneath this beautiful building, you know, there is the land is here, and it's always been there, and it's still there. And it's doing its thing. It doesn't care that we're here, or it might care for us, worry for us, but it's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to be here when this building is down, right? And I think like the Indigenous future, what I love about it is like, you know, I think I've said this to someone else before, but you know, people will say, how long is that gonna take? That's never gonna happen. And I'm always like, how long is never? It's gonna happen, right? And that's what's so amazing about it. It's like, in the future, this will already be a fact. And we're just part of that, right? We're part of that geological time. Hopefully it's faster than geological time, but yes. So I know that's not a good answer, but that's because I actually think it's a very hard question. I don't know if I can answer it. Thank you.
Again, I want to thank you for coming out and talking with us. It's really helpful and enlightening. For me, my question is, in Margaret Jacobs' book, A White Mother to a Dark Race, she talks quite frequently about the concept that Indigenous schooling and Indigenous childhood being removed is future-proofing classism. It's allowing people to lose their identity of self, where the rest of life is about refining who you were always supposed to be, which future-proofs from your ability to be a deeper version of yourself. I'd be really interested to get your take on that.
Thank you. Can I ask your name?
Salem.
Salem? Mm-hmm. Nice to meet you, Salem. Thank you for your question. Yeah, that's a great question. I can give you my take, and I just want to say I'm not an expert. These are really credible thinkers, and so I'll sort of just speak to what comes to mind, which is, yeah, I think future-proofing is a thing, you know, and I think that's how people build things to last forever, is they future-proof against all competitors. I mean, that's how they view it. It's like competitors, right? And I think that's why we have monuments. It's really, monuments are not about the past, they're about the future, right? It's about future-proofing, but it doesn't ever work, right? And I think, you know, even if boarding schools were 100%, like even if they worked, which they didn't, you know, there's other ways of knowing that I know about that I don't necessarily experience, but I know that there's people who learn from ancestors who have supposedly gone. Like, they don't have to learn from a teacher, a live teacher in a room to be connected to who they are, right? So, like Karina Gold, who is just like an incredible person. I mean, it's the kind of person we're gonna create songs for, you know? She says, you know, our language was put to sleep, and now it's waking up again, and we're finding it in the archives of the museums and things like that, but also finding it in our dreams, like our ancestors coming back and speaking to us again. So there's other ways of knowing that I don't know about, but I don't experience, well, I don't experience on the regular, right? But like, so I don't think that these man-made institutions are ever as powerful as they are trying to be. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to be.
So Wayne, I think we have time for one more question, and this one comes from online. It's
Yes,
actually
thank
from,
you.
yes, thank you online. It's from Colleen Carey, who's one of our CHID students. And Colleen asks, at some point in your educational path or academic career, did you experience a particular moment of awakening that initiated your personal cyborg journey?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for calling me a cyborg. I have multiple moments of awakening. Yeah, and also I don't want to discount dreaming, like which sometimes you do asleep, right? So yeah, multiple times of awakening, and I think, you know, the earliest ones are always somebody takes the time to tell me something, you know, and you know I'm just this arrogant, ignorant young person as I still am, you know, just like arrogant enough to talk to you, like I have something to say. I mean, kind of embarrassed, right? Any elders in the room, I'm very sorry, right? Yeah, it's just, and then someone will stop me and talk to me, you know. I have a great mentor in graduate school who I talk about all the time, you know, Patricia Bacano Lopez, and, you know, she has set me down and told me the truth more than once. Sometimes it hurt. And, but I will say, you know, some of this book is informed by some of her teachings. And, you know, I remember I was on a hunger strike once. And I don't actually want to go on a hunger strike, so this is what people don't know, is they thought I was being very political, but I actually like eating. So people came and said, but you know, it will mean a lot to, and then my partner said, you know, we work with so many families, it's gonna mean a lot for one of us to do it, and I'm pregnant. So I was like, I guess it's me. So you know, so I just didn't eat for 7 days, and you know, and all the houseless people are looking at me like, this is nothing new. Like, what are you doing here? You know, so so I was very cranky. I wasn't having the spiritual awakening that people had. And I can say more about the hunger strike. Actually, beautiful things came out of it. That was my preface. But my mentor, and I haven't told anyone this story, but my mentor challenged me on it later. She's like, you're not just an activist, you're like a aggressive activist. And she's like, and we had lots of conversations because she has sort of this school, I call it the school of PBL, right? And you know, and I can't tell you everything she said because, but it's like, but she just said we had lots of conversations, and it seems like, you know, is this really the right way to do things? And is this really, is you doing that? She didn't say it this way, but think about what demand it's making on others to do something similar. Right, and so that's what I think about a lot. Like I've always prided myself in being someone who feeds. Like I believe in like kitchens. I believe I have a big kitchen, and so that's why I had a big constituency, if you will, right? And so so this idea is like, yeah, I wouldn't want anyone I love to be there, even though I respect all the people doing it, right? So I think that was an awakening moment. There's been many things like that, and I think for me, La Paperson's work is again. It challenges me because there's lots of ideological positions I'm willing to take, but La Paperson's like, really? You know, and it's sort of like these voices of knowledge keepers, elders, young people who have the voice of elders, their ancestors speaking through them, and I've just been lucky to have multiple times like that. And sometimes they're like in elevators, you know, sometimes it's just like you're looking at your coffee. You know, they're not special moments, they're just ordinary times. And so thank you for that question.
Thank you. Well, I think we have the hall for a little while longer, so maybe this is a great space for having informal conversations here with Wayne. And let's join me in thanking Wayne Yang and La Paperson.
Thank you. Feel free to talk among yourselves, but I'll be over there talking to anyone who wants to come talk by those tables. So.
Flapping in slow motion.